and non. It is very exciting for all of us to be able to participate in this lecture and discussion with Giancarlo Valle. This talk is the second in a short series organized by us, the third year undergraduate studio, ARC 366. Our studio is titled Society of Rooms, and within the overall UIC curriculum, the studio traditionally explores topics related to interior urbanism. And faculty for this semester include Abby Chang, Palmira Garaki, and Chris Fry. And it also includes Assistant Professor Thomas Kelly, who has spearheaded these talks with experts to share their experiences and ideas as a channel for building knowledge and dialogue around the interior and models in their design process. We're happy to be able to share these talks with the students in the studio and all over the place, as well as anyone who's been interested at the school. It is also my pleasure to hand things over to Thomas, who will formally introduce Giancarlo Valle and lead a Q&A toward the end of the hour. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining, both in person and virtually. So without further ado, Giancarlo grew up in San Francisco, Chicago, Caracas, Guatemala City. He received his Master's of Architecture from Princeton University and has worked for Shop Architects in Snøhetta. His practice and showroom, Studio Giancarlo Valle, was founded in 2016 and is located in New York City. Like Gio Ponti or Alexander Girard, Giancarlo's work spans the fields of furniture, interiors, exhibition, and at one time, I believe Giancarlo even a critical theory journal. Much of Giancarlo's work can be characterized by how it looks, supple proportions and handmade materiality, qualities that are imbued in his work early at the scale of the physical model. As if Laurie Simmons were tasked with recreating her dollhouse furniture at true scale, Giancarlo's built work shares an uncanny resemblance to their miniature beginnings. Though often described through the design platitudes of primitive and modern, I tend to think of his work as a form of travel replacement, opening dialogues between timeless histories and cultures, one room or object at a time. Thank you, Giancarlo, for sharing your evening with us, and we look forward to your thoughts on model making and insights. Giancarlo.
Great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Fellow Chicagoan. I actually started my education not too far from there at the Art Institute of Chicago, and have always kept a close connection to Chicago. So this is great. I'm going to share a bunch of pictures of my studio, and which is where I'm at. We're in New York City. We're on Canal Street, sort of downtown, and it's kind of a dreary day here. But you can kind of see where this is actually our conference room. But it's really sort of an accumulation of stuff we're working on, stuff we found, and I'm going to share. It's on the screen here. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You guys see this? Okay. All good. Thanks for the sign. Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our process. I love the brief and where I think you guys are thinking in your headspace. So I'm just going to go through, I think, a really personal journey, which was sort of a roundabout way of getting to the idea of making models as a part of the studio. I mean, it's always something that has intrigued me. It's something that in my early education was a core part of architecture school, and we sort of came at it much later and really through like a specific moment in time when we actually ended up moving from our office. So we were about 2 blocks away in 2018, found an office and moved pretty much down the street. So this is the team, circa 2018, Chinatown, our entrance, right off to the left there. And this really signaled like a renewed interest in model making. So the idea that we built our studio from scratch, we gutted it and basically built it piece by piece. And that the sign, ad hoc sign that would meet you when you came up the elevator. But the office was really an evolution, and I think it's really the way we think about space making. There's really no difference in my mind between a model that we're working on and a space that we're creating. It really sort of one and the same, and I think the studio was a way to sort of fall in love with that process again, but do it in a very direct way. So like Thomas was saying, a lot of our work perhaps originates in the model form, but we're always looking at that as sort of a constant sort of feedback loop between the things that we're looking at and the things that we want these spaces to become. So the studio at really a one-to-one scale was our, really the sort of gateway into model making for us. So we sort of built the space and lived through the space. So we were working here every day and constantly tinkering with certain things. This is a great picture of our rug being installed. I just, love the scalelessness of it and how it really started to sort of inform sort of assembly of things. And it was slow. So the process, we would get samples for projects and we would lay them out, and we actually built the floor from basically an assemblage of flooring samples from different projects, rugs, our furniture, which is also something that we make, was being prototyped in that same space. So we were, really in this constant flux of building, demolishing, building, demolishing, reassembling. So that really was, it really was a core part of what we do. Another picture of our move-in day, some of our prototypes, some furniture, some 1-inch models, which is the scale that we build all of our models at. So we really use models to stage a lot of our interiors. We're thinking about them really fluidly. So all of the models are out in our studio once, and we're constantly in that sort of mode of testing different things where we're bringing models from one space into another. And, I think the space feels quite chaotic at times, but I think we sort of embrace the chaos. It's really, I think we're sort of comforted in the idea that there's an evolution through everything that we do. The models, in some ways, are very incomplete. We're adding on to them, putting them aside, bringing them back. And you're constantly building this sort of story that is something that's built up. It's not a concept that we're sort of working to figure out. It's a sort of evolutionary process, and that the space is the same way. So this is a divider between a model working space and more of a showroom space, and basically built it up over 6 months. We would install it, let it be unfinished. We'd revisit it in a couple months. We'd paint it. We'd add fabric. We'd remove fabric. We'd add fabric, remove fabric. It was just this whole process. You can see there a couple people from the team working on some finishing. And the other thing that we do is, we prototype a lot, but we're constantly working in clay because as a medium, it was always something I looked at from afar. I mean, it was very sort of simple, but very direct material. And it's the way we prototype a lot of our work, mainly because we sort of synonymous with sketching. It's the fastest and sort of quickest way to develop what we're thinking. Picture looking out on Canal Street. And so I wanted to actually just take you through 3 projects to show you a little bit how models find their way into our interiors and become the sort of reference point for our own work. It's something that we've been playing around with in different ways. We don't have a system. We don't have necessarily a starting point, but we're looking at models that are really just sort of a lens. Some models from a home that we were working on in upstate New York, different roofscapes for a project in Mexico, some shot glasses that we made in clay and then fired, also very important. Some molds from a cast iron light that we are working on. Wax. This is a case where we built this model for a home in New York. Lost the job, and then were rehired, and we sort of had this model on our shelf for 6 or 7 months, and we constantly were looking at it, and we're very interested in building a space that had all the qualities of this model. So this is the final image of that space, but I think there's constantly a sort of coming back to the model and looking at how the materials, the sensibility, the sort of the directness of a material can really inform the sort of final product. This is a sort of a crude piece of furniture that we started sculpting in the studio. This is ultimately what it ended up looking like. And the other thing we started doing too is taking pictures of our models. This is a photographer came in to start, really capturing a sort of spirit or vibe. I think that our projects with, in terms of model making, we're really looking at a spirit and an energy. And I think that was a big difference for me in sort of moving from model making and architecture as an exterior into interiors, and that was a sort of transition for me. These images were, I think, just had a real energy that we were trying to create. This is a bathroom for a project that we were working on also upstate New York, where we're trying to sort of build a story. We're drawing into the rooms, these frescoes. We'd sand the frescoes, paint over them, and we're sort of, it's a sort of constant building. And so I want to just take you through these three projects, very, very loose projects that are currently in the works, and show you a little bit about how we're using these models. This is a home, single family home in Chicago. And it's a former orphanage, about 10,000 square feet. Had no scale, very large institutional space. And the idea of building a model of every room to create some sense of scale and connect them through these openings was a starting point for us. So these are some 1-inch models: dining room, kitchen, living room, family room. And we would sort of put them together, disassemble them, reconfigure them. This is an assembly of. And then this is where we would really get into the interior. So the furniture would slowly come together. We collaborate with a lot of people in and around the area. We work a lot with ceramicists, and this was a fireplace idea that we had been playing around with, and was really the focal point for this space. So we would test the scale, look at how the construction of these tiles would be. This is a mock-up of some samples that we were playing around with, and then ultimately what these pieces would look like assembled. My 8-year-old son's attempt to incorporate himself into a model. And this is one of the views looking through these sort of separate spaces. You can see here the dining room had an idea to commission an artist to create this sort of reliefed wallpaper that were all sort of separate themes. A chair we were working on, ultimately what that chair evolved into a coat closet, how that coat closet was installed. One of the living spaces. Kitchen. Some dolls we found. Powder room. This was a project that we did last year in New York. It was a furniture show where we were mixing about 2 years worth of furniture that we had been sort of thinking about making with French post-war archival artifacts. So a lot of people that we really looked at for our collection. So people like Le Corbusier, Pierre Jeanneret, Jean Lecrat, and it was this conversation between sort of post-war ceramics, furniture, and our new collection. So we built these temporary rooms made out of fabric. This is the installation. That's a light we made in zinc. That coat rack is Le Corbusier, and the chair is Jeanneret. Table, Michel Lecrat. This shows the sort of entryways into the different spaces and the different volumes. That's a piece daybed we made. These are some of the pieces full scale. And the last project is a project we're currently working on also in New York for a collector of architect design furniture. It's a sort of an extensive collection, and we are designing it's a ground up house that really has no outside. So we're looking at the furniture and the scale, the proportion of specifically Barragán. This collector has a large amount of pieces of Barragán. And what's interesting about that is that we were kind of working with the scale of the pieces and building the space to react to that. So there was really almost no program. And all the pieces that are in this collection came from Casa Pietro Lopez in Mexico City. So a lot of the furniture here, which is really oversized and quite deep, is sort of the template and the sort of palette for the space. So really we were given the collection, about 500 pieces, and have been in the process of unpacking them and building a story and a narrative behind these artifacts. Alexander Knoll, Pierre Chapeau, slightly more contemporary masks. This is an etching by Le Corbusier as part of this collection. And then really the process was starting to sort of build these pieces into these rooms. Salto vase. We really wanted to take this one step further and build these pieces to scale in the space. So to mock up these rooms and really walk through them. These are the original pieces. So this was the sort of first step towards articulating that. Client was very adamant that they wanted to see everything one-to-one. Select. Click here. That's it.
Thanks, Giancarlo. You got a few minutes to answer some questions?
Absolutely.
Cool. Gonna open up the chat. And students, maybe while you collect your thoughts and think about maybe some questions you'd like to ask Giancarlo, I can start with a couple softballs. I think there are a variety of, I don't want to say tropes, but I guess I'll use that word, that if you look long enough at the images, both of the models and of the final work, that you'll start to pick up on, again, tropes in the way you light, tropes in the way you arrange things, maybe tropes even in the way you, stage the camera relative to those things. Because one thing that I always find fairly consistent in the work too is the use of the plaster wall as like almost like a default, like textured backdrop for a lot of these other maybe more specific things to happen. I was kind of curious about your thoughts about like the architectural surfaces and like how you look at those relative to objects, furniture, light, and whether the plaster wall is something that you rely heavily on, or it's not part of the evolutionary process you spoke of earlier. Just curious about like the wall surface itself, kind of the most basic unit of architecture that kind of exists in these spaces.
That's a good question. I think we're always kind of zooming in and out, right? I think that the plaster, or sort of default surface, might exist in a sort of backdrop situation, but it could also be an object, right? And where you then sort of build off of that. I think what is, I think, a constant interest of mine is not is the sort of assembly and disassembly of these spaces to sort of find what sticks and what doesn't. I'm a big believer in a body of work that sort of that needs to evolve on itself. So, you know, I think there's just a very intentional motivation here to leave everything out, right? So it's not that it's unfinished; it's that there might be another life for that particular thing. And so it could be that the plaster wall or these sort of maybe more generic backdrops become ceramic in another iteration, and we might not know that, you know. And I think it's just that the sort of being comfortable in that uncertainty.
Sure, and I think that's clear. I don't think you treat the wall as this precious artifact, and
Right.
It's great to hear you refer to it as unfinished. I think, you know, I would also, I don't know, to read deeper into it, look at, there's something kind of political in also the motivations behind, I don't know, what plaster might mean relative to like the modern movement, and you know, a drive towards like more artisanal methods of working with material and space. But maybe that's also something you could also expand on, is, you know, relative to the myriad collaborations that happen like within your projects between you and your team, but you and the owner, but also you and the makers and artists that you kind of work with. I'm also curious about the types of, I guess, conversations that you have around the narratives that you're trying to tell with the space, and like how open those conversations are or potentially closed, who's driving them. You know, I think here at UIC, we try to take a less autocratic approach to the architect as the kind of, you know, single most important person in the room. And I'm also just curious about your style of collaboration.
Yeah, I think the style, it's also a great question. I think the style and the approach is about improvising. I think that's also why I love interiors, because improvising in architecture is a lot harder. It takes a lot longer. It's very hard to find a surprise when everything you do is thought out beforehand. So I like the sort of jazz quality of interiors, which you like to not think about too much, and just react or make. And it extends to these collaborations. I mean, work a lot with two ceramicists. Matthew Merkel who's in Harlem, and Natalie Weinberger, who's is in Brooklyn. And Matt is like a cartoonist. You know, his references are hilarious, and is very lighthearted about what he does. And he'll just make some stuff, put it on the table, we'll look at it, and we'll say, what could this be? He makes a lot of the tile tables. He actually glazes and fires a lot of the ceramics that we make, the sort of pieces of this pie. But we've been like the picture on the screen. He's doing these surrounds in ceramic using his sort of signature motif of like eyeballs and fingers, and like they're just very personal references. And I love that there's just something so unpredictable about working with something like that, and it's quite refreshing to sort of have that and be able to adjust and react and not necessarily know where you're going. Sort of the anti-concept, I guess.
Sure.
But I think interiors were a way to get at it, and models as well. They obviously serve a purpose in what we do, and I think we look at them literally, but we also like to sort of treat them for what they are.
I want to also just touch on like this issue of maybe expectations. You know, I think as architects, we rely on a variety of forms of representative material to describe our intent to whomever we're working for at the time. And I guess I'm curious about, like, my sense is that the models are shared with the clients. But if the client understands the model also to be a sketch, like, what level of expectation is there with the client to see that model and those maybe visceral, sketchy like moves, jazz-like moves in the final product? Is there, like, I don't know, probably a variety of different ways you can respond to that, but like when the sketch becomes the final thing, like how loose or how firm are those expectations?
Yeah, I think the models, the models are about like just a vibe, right? So we're basically creating a vibe. They buy into that idea, and I think early on it was a lot harder to sort of say, hey, do you want to live in this space? It's charged. It has its own energy, right? And people will project what they want into it. We like that the model is somewhat incomplete, but it's also like highly packed. I mean, there's definitely a point of view that we're trying to communicate in, and I think the more recent work and more recent projects and clients that they're coming to talk to us are sort of buy into that. They want to go on that journey, and they're okay not knowing where they're going. But it's also a layered process. Like, it doesn't happen. They're buying into it. We tend to stay on these projects for years, and we just sort of build them and over time. So we're sourcing pieces that are historical pieces. We're making pieces. I think it's about it's about that art and being okay with maybe no end. There's sort of snapshots really in time, which is, I think, what this lecture is.
I think that's really reassuring. I mean, you hear these stories about like Joseph Duran, like painting, like repainting a room 13 different times to get the color, kind of the texture right. And I mean, it really takes a very specific kind of collaborator to realize that, like, I guess one-to-one can also be prototype, or the actual room that one lives in can actually be worked on and evolve over time. And yeah, it's encouraging to hear that. Students, Stuart, Abby, Chris, any kind of thoughts for Giancarlo?
Actually, Thomas.
Yes.
Just going off of what you were just saying. So, Giancarlo, thank you for being with us, and I've been following your work and love it. And one question I've had is, I love your the way you use color. And I was just really curious to what Thomas was just saying about repainting your room a million times. How reactive are you to color? At what point in the process does it come in? Is it something that sometimes you start with and then let other things react to it? Would you say that you sort of have certain tendencies, or is there a palette that you work with? Would you be open to just about anything? I haven't seen any neon in your work, for example. So, like, is there an earthiness to both the material choices for the furniture and other pieces as well? I mean, your love for ceramics, for example, sort of really shows through the selection of colors, I believe, as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, color is great. It was an acquired taste, I would say, for me, in terms of the trial and error. But I think it's one of those things where if starting with a color, it triggers a memory, right? I mean, I think that's where a lot of it starts for me is to sort of say, okay, what if this room was red? What does that mean for you? What does that mean for the client? It ultimately means a million different things. And so we go through this process of like imagining rooms in different colors as a sort of, almost like sort of cycling and seeing what the reactions are. They're so personal. So I think that there's something, I like that it means different things to different people, and that you really can't prescribe that reaction. So, we love when a client says, okay, let's go this direction. And we're working with a lot of just like clients that are very like visually savvy and you know, can help us, can usually push us out of our comfort zone. But you know, the ceramics too are, I mean, I love ceramics because they are so unpredictable. It is impossible to create a flat tile. You know, it's just like one of the hardest things to do. If you talk to any ceramicists, and again, I'm a tourist when it comes to ceramics. I get that from afar, but you really don't know where you're going with it, and that's what I think that's my sort of response with color, is that you sort of start on a track and you might reverse it, you might go like push on it, and that I think it does inform it informs and does set the tone very, very early on, but sometimes we arrive at color very late, you know, and we find there might be an important piece of furniture that we've identified, is purchased, and we build that room around it. And so we're constantly going like large to small and small to large. And that's sort of the not knowingness that I like about.
Giancarlo, we have a question from the YouTube channel from one of our graduate students, Cody Schuler. He writes, it's interesting the studio contains a showroom. Does that come from your relationship to the model, acting as sort of a stage set or showroom for the projects you're working on?
It's a really good question, because I think we've thought a lot about what to call it. I mean, it's really a space that has a bunch of stuff in it, that half of it we might never make again, but some of it we might. And it is. I mean, that space right now, we're in the process of building more walls, taking more walls down. I think it's a process that I think my team is not as comfortable as I am with. But I like that sort of, you know, unfinished nature of it. And I think people come in and you immediately sort of step into something. You can see it. I mean, I like it when it's sort of filled, when there's more stuff than not. Yeah, what you can see here, this is a little bit of that.
Thanks. Stuart? Do you want to ask?
Do you guys have questions?
Stuart's coming up.
Hey, thank you for that. Awesome. Thank you for that great talk. It was very inspiring. And I guess I just had some quick question, or a quick question, and I guess, oh boy, I screwed everything up. There we go. Okay. I don't know. Maybe it's a bias, or maybe it's like maybe it's just like narcissism on my part or something. Like I'm interested in the way you're talking about the role of time in relationship to the role of authorship. Like I was thinking about your work when we were watching it, like it almost has a kind of urbanism to it, you know, even though it's about the interior, you know, it has this organic growth sort of quality where there's multiple authors and things happening. And I guess, and we touched on this a couple different ways, and you talked about improvisation and things. And I guess I'm just looking for how you see your role as an author in that process. And like you talked about establishing a vibe, or you know, directing or improvising, which almost kind of denounces authorship. And I guess I'm just wondering, like, because interiors and things, like your name is attached to a lot of this, you know, like your name being a part of the authorship of it is really important. But there's all of these sort of de-authoring devices that are at play. And I guess I'm just wondering if you could say a word or two about that.
Yeah, that's it's something that I think we like, me personally, but also we like the studio, play with a lot. You know, it sort of changes. I mean, I think that you know, we make a lot of things, we design a lot of things in these spaces, and oftentimes people don't know that we do. And I like that sometimes it's a bit of a camouflage game. I think it's a lot of why we like to bring historical figures, you know, important figures. I mean, the Barragan project has been of like particular interest because, you know, how do you make anything that lives in a space with you know, I mean, Barragan didn't even produce furniture. There's only, you know, 7 homes that were ever designed, and the furniture just lives in those homes. And there's like access to one home that had that furniture removed. So it's like, how do you create a dialogue with that? And I don't know, sort of dial it up or play it down. And I think it's being subtle and trying to be subtle in certain places, and then amplifying it in others. And you know, I think there's definitely a sort of world of that we're trying to, that has been, you know, a motivation, you know, to get people excited about this process. You know, there is a name attached, but it's I think it's just a more open position to where we're going. So, but look, I think we struggle with the authorship thing all the time, and it's that good struggle. It's that, like, where are we going? Can, you know, and I think over time, you know, people were to say, did you work on this project? They might not know, and I think that's something kind of interesting. You know, there's a sort of camouflage element to it, that I think as some of the new projects start to take further shape, there's just a more ambiguity, you know, about that. I mean, there's sort of the people that in the design figures that are in those that we sort of build around, and I mean, I personally like that dialogue, but I think it's about that. It's about the sort of larger assemblage, you know, or assembly that I'm interested in.
Interesting. Any questions? All right, well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the audience. That was awesome. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Giancarlo.
Great work.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Next time you're in Chicago, look us up, please.
I'm there.
All right, you have a great night, man.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.